Selamat datang di Jakarta Content Week, sinergi Asia Tenggara yang diselenggarakan oleh Yayasan 17.000 Pulau Imaji dengan dukungan Direktorat Jenderal Kebudayaan, Kementerian Pendidikan, Kebudayaan, Riset, dan Teknologi Republik Indonesia, serta Lembaga Pengelola Dana Pendidikan LPDP melalui program pemanfaatan hasil kelola dana abadi kebudayaan. Welcome to Jakarta Content Week, Southeast Asia Synergy, the 17,000 Islands of Imagination Foundation, in collaboration with the Directorate General of Culture, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology of Indonesia, and the Education Fund Management Institution (LPDP) through the Cultural Endowment Fund Utilization Program proudly present Road to Jakarta Content Week, Southeast Asia Synergy. This event aims to bridge the literary worlds of Southeast Asian countries, overcoming challenges such as language differences, geopolitical barriers, and the lack of previous initiative to connect our diverse literary communities. Additionally, it will be beneficial if the works of Southeast Asian writers could be more recognized in their own region compared to works from other parts of the world. In a moment, we will start the How Do Translators Work to Bring Literature Beyond Their Country session. I will call our moderator who will guide today's session, Ayu Widari. Niputu Ayu Widari, an associate government translator, has been working at the Agency for Language Development and Cultivation, Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology since 26. She is currently the coordinator of translation for language diplomacy purpose. For Ayu Widari, the floor is yours.
Test. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. Thank you for joining us today. And we will discuss about how do translator works to bring literature beyond their country. And today we will discuss the crucial role of translators in bringing Southeast Asian literature to the international stage. As Jose Saramago once pointed out, the role of translator is often overlooked, even though they are the facilitator of dialogue between two different cultures. Allow me to introduce our distinguished speakers for today. First, we have John McLean, a translator, editor, and also publisher. He is the co-founder of the Lontar Foundation, which aims to promote Indonesian literature to a global audience. And he has facilitated the publication of nearly 250 books and translated works by over 650 Indonesian authors. Wow. And his efforts have been instrumental in introducing Indonesian writers to abroad. And next we have Alfian Saad, a Singaporean writer and translator. He is well known for his works in both Malay and English and has received numerous accolades for his share to the literary scene. And lastly, we have Nguyen An Ly, Miss An Ly, a renowned translator from Vietnam. And she has translated numerous works from Vietnamese to English and vice versa, and has received various awards, including the English Pen Translating Award for Chinatown, and also for her contribution in promoting Vietnamese culture internationally. All right, now I would like to invite our speakers to deliver their presentation. Let's start with Alfian Saad. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I don't know whether you're as cold as I am. That's why I've got a coat on. I don't usually look this formal, but I'm freezing. So I think I will just start by introducing some of the works that I've done. Both works as a translator and also as a writer who has had his works translated into other languages, yeah? And then I think that's just sort of like a very brief introduction, and then we can use that as a launch pad for further discussions, yeah? But just to give you some visuals, some pictures to look at. Okay, first slide. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So this was a work in Malay called Menara by Isa Kamari, written in 2002. And then I translated it. It was commissioned by Epigram Books from Singapore. Isa Kamari is a writer who writes in Malay in Singapore and is also winner of the Cultural Medallion, which is one of the highest literary honors in Singapore. So this was translated in 2013 and into The Tower. And as you can see, the cover also got a glow up. This is something I think that bedevils, quite a bit of Malay literature in Singapore. The covers are really bad, not nice at all. Menara, yeah. So, but it's Menara, but the cover is Merana, right? So, so I'm so glad that it's got new cover. It's a much more elegant design there. Yeah, they were playing with typography for that. Okay, next slide. So this is another ugly cover. So bad. But yes, it was done in 1998 by the late Muhammad Latif Muhammad, who is also a Cultural Medallion winner. He wrote this novel in Malay, and we translated it into English as The Widower in 2018. So The Widower is not a direct translation, as you would know, of Ziarah Cinta. It was just very tricky to turn that into Malay. And I think, to English, sorry. And I think it's because, it's a stream of consciousness novel. It's spoken from the point of view of this man who's bereaved because his wife has passed on. So we felt that, okay, The Widower would work. Okay, next slide. These happen to be some of the translations of my works. So I wrote a collection of short stories in 1999 called Corridor, and it was translated to both Japanese as well as Mandarin. The Mandarin translation is very recent. It was done in Singapore, and I think only in the past 2 years. The one in Japanese was earlier, but the translator made a decision to translate the title not just as Corridor, but it's something like Sayang Singapura, Sayang Singapore. So that, I guess, is the choice that she made, maybe to highlight the fact that it's a book that's coming out from Singapore, because sometimes when foreign readers want to pick up a book, they might be interested in the country, there's a certain kind of like ethnographic kind of interest in, okay, what is Singapore literature like? Okay, there's this book here with Singapore is on its title, maybe I'll pick it up. Yeah. So it's a collection of short stories. Yeah, it was originally written in English. Next slide. I also had this book, which is called Malay Sketches, that was published in 2012. It's a collection of short stories / flash fiction. Some of the stories are really, really very short. And I think it lent itself to translation. So the first one was done during a translation workshop in Yangon. Many years ago, I think 2016 or something. And then the second one is the Japanese translation. The third one is a Polish translation done in Poland. So the Burmese one is very interesting to me because it was a form of collective translation. It started out as a series of translation workshops. Yeah, so you had people who were not necessarily professional translators trying their hand during these translation workshops, picking out different, because they were short stories. That's why I said they're very amenable to translation workshops, translation work. What seemed especially meaningful for me during that time was that there was the Rohingya crisis that was going on. Yeah, and I felt like the act of translating stories, most of them set within the Muslim community in Singapore, was a way, I think, for the participants to kind of like engage with what Muslim identity could be, with the background of all this like rising Islamophobia in Burma at that point of time, right? So there was like the right-wing Buddhists, for example, right-wing monks who were spewing a lot of like Islamophobic invective, especially on Facebook, right? And Facebook really dropped the ball in that one. There was like hardly any moderation for hate speech, yeah? So I think the fact that they were translating these stories. A lot of them were involving Muslim culture, Muslim rituals, Muslim practices. I think gave them a kind of insights and a kind of entryway into Muslim culture. So I really enjoyed those workshops, and the end result was this book. Then after that, I have the Japanese translation of the book. I really love Japanese and Taiwanese books. The way they are designed, they're really works of art, right? If you go to all these like Taiwanese, Japanese bookstores, you have the book, and then there's like a little banner around it, and then the paper that they use is really special. It's kind of like washi paper or something. The Japanese is really, really good at craftsmanship, right? So I think they really take a lot of pride in book production. So I felt that as an author, to have a book in Japanese was really special. And then the third one is a Polish translation. Yeah. I have to apologize to anyone who's Malaysian in the audience for the cover, because this was I suppose the designer's imagination of Singapore. Okay, and what you have there is a kind of stall which is called a Ramly burger stall. We don't really have this in Singapore, and I think like internationally, sometimes there's this confusion between the Malay and Malaysian, right? So I would go overseas and people would say, are you Malaysian? And I say, no, I'm Malay. Oh, but aren't Malays from Malaysia, right? So I think there's that confusion, because China, Chinese, right? England, English. And then some people assume that, if you're Malay, you're from Malaysia. But of course, Malays are everywhere, Singapore, Brunei, Indonesia. So I always have to do this kind of little education when I'm overseas and try to delink Malayness and Malaysia. Yeah. So in spite of that, the graphic design. So when I first saw the cover, I didn't really know how to respond. I didn't really feel it was in my place to correct the person, but yeah. So that I guess perpetuates this link between Malaysia and Malay. Okay. Final slide. And then these are the Chinese translations of Malay sketches. Interestingly, it's in both traditional Chinese as well as simplified Chinese. So the one on the left is the one in traditional Chinese, and it's because it's published in Taiwan, right? Because they are still using traditional Chinese script in Taiwan. And the one on the right is by a Shanghainese publisher, and they published it in simplified Chinese because that's the one that's used in China. Yeah, so traditional Chinese Taiwan, simplified Chinese in China. Again, another kind of design choice which I wasn't so sure of. If you look at the one on the right, the one that's published in China, the designer has decided to put little diacritics on the Chinese characters, and that's the imagination of like Arabic kind of lettering. Yeah, so there's this idea that, okay, Malay and then Muslim, even though, there are a few Muslim stories in the book, but it's not like an Islamic book, right? So again, that was a little, maybe not my place to design the design, yeah? So I feel that what's interesting is that these are works of translation, but I think in terms of the graphic design, something got lost in translation. So yeah, that's it. That's just to give you an overview of some of the stuff that I've been involved with. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you, Alfian. And next, I would like to invite An Lee, to share her thoughts about the translation in Vietnam nowadays. An Lee, please.
Hello. Well, it is kind of difficult to say something like definite about Vietnamese literature in translation now, because I think for like several decades now, we have been translating Vietnamese literature to English and some other languages without much success and with so much fanfare. I used to explain to my friends who put to me these kind of questions that most of the Vietnamese books translated into English have been in like university presses done by academics who are not necessarily very good translators, and those books are not necessary for public consumption. Some are very good indeed, but they have little channels to publicize, and sometimes they're not really made to be read, but rather than made to be like fulfilling some criteria for some PhD thesis or something, and sometimes it does be like that, and then there are a lot of other projects which are done in Vietnam, published in Vietnam to sell. I'm not sure who they are supposed to be selling for, perhaps expats in Vietnam, so that they have something to read, but they don't really know about outside of Vietnam. So there are a lot of good books which are due to copyright reasons and publicity reasons, then just like, I don't know how to describe it, died in obscurity or something. And there are the other kind of books which are like The Startup War by Bảo Ninh, which is to date the most famous books from Vietnam, which was, I think, translated and read for political reasons more than for literary reasons, and only recently that we know that the translations are not very like faithful to the spirit and the style of the book, but it is much more suitable to an American audience, and that explains its fame and reception in the US. And Bảo Ninh is a very famous author in Vietnam, and his fame and his reception is well deserved, but perhaps not wholly in a way that people who have read his original styles can understand about him. So and then I have my slides, please. And then there is another kind of Vietnamese literature that is now known about when international friends know when they think about Vietnamese literature, which are novels. I think that these three are famous enough so that I don't have to explain who they are and what they write about. But those are written in English for an English-speaking audience. And the first two are written by like second generation Vietnamese who are very talented authors indeed, but they are very different from what we produce in Vietnam. And as you can see, as for now, apart from Ocean Vuong's book, which was published like, I think, 3 years ago. The other two haven't been published in Vietnam yet, and the Sympathizer, I think it's safe to say that perhaps it will never see the light of day in Vietnam. And I don't know about the Mountains thing. It has been translated like, there was talk about translation and production like 2 years ago, but so far it hasn't been gone. So you can see that most of the international perception about what it means to be reading Vietnamese literature is very different from the way that the Vietnamese inside Vietnam knows about Vietnamese literature. So, can I have the next slide, please? And these are the 4 most recent Vietnamese books translated into English and published in last year and this year. This is from the SIMS database, a very excellent database. I encourage everyone who wants to know about the status of Southeast Asian literature translated into English to go and consult their website. The first, the Bảo Ninh short story is the same one who wrote Star of War, and the short stories of various authors are very much like academic edition. And Tạ Duy Anh is a famous novelist of Vietnam, and this is what comes most closest to what is a contemporary author and a a famous book, not necessarily the best book of him, but one of his famous books being translated and pushed out recently. And finally, Nhã Thuyên is a poet, an experimental poet, and I must say that this poetry is this poetry collection is very much published in an independent publisher, and I'm not sure if it will be read far apart from the experimentalist poets circle. And final slide, please. And this is the 3 novels that I have translated into English. The one in the middle, Elevator of Saigon, is actually just out this week. And the final one, Water, a Chronicle, will hopefully be out in October. So these are 2 of the most famous female women authors in Vietnam. And they are, Nguyễn Tư is actually someone who can come close to be able to live by her income as an author, writing only literary books and essays. But those haven't been translated. The 2 novels by Thuận have been first put out in Vietnam in 2005 and 2013, respectively. But and they are very well received, and Chantal, I think, have gained somewhat of a small cult following. But those won't be able to be translated into English if not for the PEN Awards. I mean, if the publishers have not the resource and the reputation and the expertise to apply and to get this kind of awards, those kind of books may never be seen as a light today. So translations of Vietnamese book into English is a long story, and I hope it will have more future. But for now and for the time being, it still very much depends on the somewhat loathsome efforts of independent publishers and the personal connections of authors and sometimes of translators who are not sure that they will be paid according to what they deserve. Yeah, we want to work to change that, but we don't really know how. And so this is a topic that today I hope that I can hear from you, and especially from John, because yeah.
Okay, thank you, Anne. And Pak John, would you like to give us a little bit brief about your works on Indonesian literary?
Okay, I don't have a visual presentation, so you just have to look at me, okay? But I wanted to make a comment on the title of this program itself, is How Do Translators Work to Bring Literature Beyond Their Country? The fact is, most translators are not from their own country. But most translators, I mean, I'm one example, are foreigners, usually foreigners, who fight to bring another country to international, to the international stage. But it's always, so I call those people like single fighters. And that's the bane of the translation industry, is that we have too many translators working alone. A book does not get published without a publisher, period. We have too many translators translating, and then aren't able to find a publisher. I know we're going to get into this later, but it's very much a work. Translation is always a work of collaboration, starting with the translator, the publisher, and then if the country has some noble purpose, a translation funding agency, all these things are so important to get a good translation out. But a little background about the Lontara Foundation. I mean, we have an primarily Indonesian audience, so I don't think I have to say much. But I came here in 1976 as a student of wayang kulit. I was studying puppetry at the time, and lived here for 3 years, went to the University of Indonesia, then decided to do my MA in Southeast Asian Literature at the University of Michigan. So between 1976 and the time I got my degree and then moved back to Indonesia, everything in the newspaper, everything in the mass media was, I mean, anything about Indonesia was usually negative. I mean, sensational. There was whether it was, riots or economic problems, that kind of thing. There was absolutely no balance in the international mass media about Indonesia. So I was working here as a translator, and as most translators are not able to survive as literary translators, I was doing bank reports, economic surveys, and so on and so forth to support myself. But Sapardi Djoko Damono got the Sea Right Award in 1976, I think it was, and I had been translating. He was my teacher at the University of Indonesia, and I had been translating his poems, and he asked me to bring out, so we brought out a short collection of his poems to take to Thailand. And Gunawan Muhammad had the money. He helped pay for the printing of it at the time. And so we just got to thinking, like, how come Indonesia doesn't have, a translation agency, some kind of agency? And so that's when we started. 1986, the idea came, and then 1987, we established the Lontara Foundation. And as Ayu already mentioned, since that time, we've done close to about 250 separate titles containing work by more than 650 Indonesian authors. Because of which, as was announced by the president of the Frankfurt Book Fair, Indonesia would not have been chosen to be at the Frankfurt Book Fair if it had not been for the work of the Lontara Foundation. I'm not saying this to be prideful at all. This is something that should have been done by the government long before Lontara existed. And since its existence, Lontara has survived only with the help of friends. We were fortunate to get some government assistance, in around the time of the London Book Fair and the Frankfurt Book Fair. But the millions of dollars we have spent over the 37 years, almost entirely from private donations, And so I wish we had a book display, here. I'm sorry we don't. But anyway, translation is a collaborative work, but it's also very much a work of love. I mean, I don't think there's any translator who translates a literary work if he or she does not love the country that it comes from, And I think we have a group of lovers here. Anyway, we have to get into some serious questions. I'm sure Ayu wants to take the floor.
Okay, thank you, Pak John. And like what you mentioned before, you've been translating a lot of books, also Bapak and also Alfian, but literature from Southeast Asia often faces difficulties in gaining recognition on the global stage. And what do you think are the main challenges in bringing the works of our writers to the readers around the world? And Alfian, please.
Gosh, yeah. So I also want to kind of like problematize the title right here, which is that beyond their country. I think one thing I need to give a background of is the fact that in Singapore, even though it's a very, very small country, we have 4 official languages. So that's English, Malay, Mandarin/Chinese, as well as Tamil. Yeah, that's the kind of designated language for the Indian community in Singapore. So I think a lot of the translation that happens within Singapore, maybe part of it is internationalization, but I think a lot of it is trying to make all these literatures kind of like legible to the readers within Singapore. So in Canada, for example, there's the Francophone and the Anglophone side, right? And there's this phrase where they call it the two solitudes, because apparently, you know, there's very little communication between those two worlds. And in Singapore, sometimes I feel if you're mainly writing in those languages, in a non-English language, you can almost speak of a situation of the 4 solitudes in Singapore. So I think a lot of the translation grant and the support is for us to try to translate each other's works and to try to be able to understand and to recognize that Singapore literature is not just English literature. That's one thing, yeah? Okay. But anyway, just to jump back to your question, I do think one of the reasons, one of the problems, I think, in this idea of internationalizing or getting international recognition for our works is a very simple geopolitical one, which is, what does the world know about your country? You know, how important is your country geopolitically in the world? I can imagine, for example, American readers being interested in Vietnam because that's part of their history, right? The American War in Vietnam, the Vietnam War in America. So for a very tiny country like Singapore, I think in terms of like the global imagination of what this country is, or what stories it can tell, I think that's always been a bit of a struggle for us. Yeah, Singapore also as being a very cosmopolitan Anglophone country, modern in that way. I think we also can't ride on the Asian exotic kind of bandwagon as well. So people think that, oh, Singaporeans, you're just very westernized. So what kinds of like interesting stories could you tell which you know is so different from the experience of, say, Westerners, right? So I'm talking about like a more Anglo-American Western audience, that Western gaze. Yeah. So that's not to say that some Singaporeans have not sort of broke into the international market. I mean, I'm not proud to say this, but Crazy Rich Asians.
Why don't they say Crazy Rich Singaporeans?
Right, yes, that's right, yeah. Exactly, right? So I think that's one way to jump into, and I think it feeds into certain Westerner stereotypes of all these like nouveau riche Asians who, you know, see their status elevated, but at the end of the day, they are still buying Western designer brands and, you know, Western designer goods. So in a sense, it's like a rising Asia, but at the same time, you're still consuming Western products. Your sense of status and all that is still coming from the West. So at the end of the day, it still kind of like flatters the West. There isn't really the threat of this like rising Asia, rising China that's going to displace the West economically. So I think that's one of my problems with the book. I got many problems with that book, but that's one. And also the kind of, in that book, the kind of elevation of like East Asians, and then all the Southeast Asians, the brown-skinned Asians in that book, for example, you know, they're not the rich Asians. Yeah. So I think that's another critique of that book. That's another story. So I feel, you know, one thing that we can't escape is, of course, that geopolitical reason. Another thing also, I suppose, is, do people in the West, do so-called international readers, what curiosity do they have about other parts of the world, right? So there's this statistic where Americans, like, I think half of them don't have passports, don't have international passports, right? So, and if you show them like a world atlas or something like that, and you ask them to point where's Iran, you know, that some of them might struggle with it. So again, I think if you're dealing with certain, say, quite insular societies who feel that, you know, their culture is enough, and they don't need to sort of like stray out and see what else they can discover from the world, then that's obviously going to be an obstacle as well. Yeah, so I think, I don't think translators alone bear this task. I think publishers, distributors as well, people who market books, really have such a task ahead of them in trying to do this kind of bridging, right? How can we nurture that kind of curiosity in our readers. Yeah. But later on, we can also talk about what translators can do in terms of like imagining this thing, which is the international audience, you know. But is there such a thing to begin with, right? And then we can talk about translation strategies, domestication, foreignization, but we'll go there. But I'd love to hear from our other panelists.
Well, if you start talking about challenges, we could be here until, I just don't know how long. The good news is that one of the biggest challenges has been taken care of through the internet. The thing is, when Lontar was established in 1987, if we wanted to sell our books in the United States, for example, we had to ship the books to the United States. If they didn't sell in 3 months to 6 months, we had to pay to have them shipped back, or they were pulped, you know. Today, of course, with, print on demand, you can, upload from your own country, and they can be all over the world. That doesn't ensure great distribution, however. I mean, I see distribution itself as the biggest challenge, because even within the country here, distributors take approximately 60% of the book's price. So if a book costs 100,000 rupiah, that means 60,000 is going to the distributor. Whereas all the bulk of the work is in the publishing. And in translation, it's even worse. I mean, usually the cost of a book is 20 to 25, maybe even 30% of the net price. And so you got that 60% going to the publisher. Now you put 25% going, to the, let's say 30% to the cost. That's 90% of the cost of the book. A translation usually costs at least 10%, that other 10%, usually 20 to 30%. So usually the cost of a translation is far more than that of an original text. I'm a translator. I've translated lots of books, but it certainly wasn't for the money. It certainly wasn't for the money. I mean, let's give one example. Leila Hudori's 350-page novel, Pulang, which I translated as Home. If it takes me an average a half hour to an hour to translate one page, that means I have spent, at least 350 hours on the book. Divide that by 40 hours a month. So how many months have I spent on that? And what did I get? I think I got 10 million. I think I got less than $1,000. So, we have so many challenges, but I would say in the marketing, it's the distribution. In the quality of publication, it's the poor amount the translators are paid. And that is where the government has to come in.
Oh God, this is a story that we hear every time in any of the translators gathering, but since this is not a translators gathering, I will just say that I second everything that John has just talked about. Since I have been a translator from other languages to Vietnamese for like 16 years now, and only recently coming to the Vietnamese to English world, I have nothing to complain about that second segment of my career, because it is much better than my first. Also, as an example, I translated The Remains of the Day of Kazuo Ishiguro, or perhaps you have heard of it, and I think I got a little bit over $500 for that book. But it's normal rate in Vietnam, so I don't have much to complain about that. what we are talking about?
Challenge
Okay.
to bring the Vietnamese literature.
So I think the biggest obstacle is that our Southeast Asian countries don't have that romanticism surrounding our world, our cities, our stories, the same way that like a story set in Paris or a Venice can bring to a potential reader. So you have all seen how recently the Korean and Japanese cultural world have make a big splash in the Western countries, and that is also the result of a big and long campaign of governmental and private, like if I or my friends, my agency friends wants to pitch a Vietnamese book to say an UK publisher, it's better that publisher has a policy that focus on translating and promoting East Asian or other minority language and cultures, and such is the case with TAP, Tilted Axis. They are not only a publisher, but they are like somewhat of an activist in their field, and that is why they seek out works from this or that country and region, and that's why they got my friend Nhã Thuyên, the poet that I have showed on the screen, to publish a chapbook with them, and then from all kinds of connections, they got in contact with my first author, Thuan's agent, and then they got into contact with me, and that book was published, and then they signed the second book. And my second publisher is a newly established publisher by a Vietnamese academic who wants to just do a publishing house to promote Vietnamese literature. But apart from that, I'm not sure if I can pitch any of the other various and abundant Vietnamese titles which can be, in my opinion, vying with other good titles from elsewhere. Actually, we in Vietnam have developed a sense of detecting what kind of stories that we can sell to Western audience, like stories of war, of poverty, of women's and minority rights, and LGBT, and so on and so forth. And if we want to pitch a project to someone who doesn't really concentrate on minority stories, we will have to pitch by those kind of themes, and not like saying that this is a marvelous work of great literary merits with exceptional storytelling and very mind-blowing insights. Because if they have the choice of such a work by some French or Italian authors and such a work by Vietnamese or Malaysian authors, I think because I worked in publishing myself, and I know that I would choose the European authors because it will sell better. And then I think Sad has just, someone has just said in the last panel, we don't really have the sense of Southeast Asian as a region, and we can't capitalize on the solidarity or from something like that. While we have the East Asian region, we have the East European, we have the Latin American literature, but we don't have that with Southeast Asian literature. And I remember a masterclass I gave in Singapore Writers Festival. The very topic was about the Southeast Asian translator, and one of the attendee asked me, why should we adopt that label? Why don't we just be a translator from Vietnamese and that, so on and so forth? Why do we have to adopt this label, Southeast Asian translator and country and literature? And it was such a a difficulty to explain to her that this is not a label, it's just some solidarity and some. Actually, she is Vietnamese. Yeah, that is some. And I think finally there is the barrier of language, because it's very difficult to find, in my own experience, it's difficult to find a competent Vietnamese to English translator, even if we have great editors, native English speakers, and so on. But you know how hard it is to train a translator from scratch, and if they do have that kind of expertise, they will often do other things that make money better, because translators is a work of a labor, not of love, but like I would say of masochism or something. And sometimes, for example, if I myself as a translator and a publisher wants to choose a book from other Southeast Asian countries to publish or to introduce or just to look into it, I want to be able to tap on most of the works that was not already written in English. Yesterday I went to the publisher forum and pitching session, and a lot of titles are very interesting to me, but when I look it up, it's just in Indonesian and or in Malaysian, so I will have to wait until there's an English translation of available.
In English, yeah.
Yeah, so that is something.
Okay. Yeah. Please, Bapak.
I'd like to add something. The thing is, I think it's already been mentioned at the Publishers Forum earlier, and before that, Southeast Asia has a population of 650 million. If you take in China and India, that is 2/3 of the population of the world. So, I mean, all eyes are always on the West. The West. I mean, it's in the publishing industry, that's the mecca, I guess, of the publishing industry. But it's so short-sighted and it's so hopeless to depend on the Western publishers to produce more than maybe 1 or 2 titles by a foreign author. I mean, the thing is, like Hyperion, or now it's Hachette, publishes Pramudia. They don't want another Indonesian author. They filled that slot. Eka Kurniawan is being published by this, so they don't need another Indonesian author. They think that they've done their job. And they only want novels. Generally novels set in an urban situation. Hopefully there's a young woman involved. Hopefully there's sex and some violence. But you get this homogeneous look if you look at the popular novels that come out. Try to sell a collection of short stories. Try to sell a collection of poetry or essays or drama to almost any Western publisher. You're not going to succeed. I mean, that's why countries have to do it on their own.
Okay, thank you, Bapak. And building on that another key aspect is like what you mentioned before. It's about the relationship between literature and the book industry, and we know that these links are not as strong as they could be. And this thing can limit the reach and impact of our literature actually. And so what I want to ask is, what efforts that do you, all of you believe that we can make to strengthen the relationship between our literature and the book industry? Who wants to answer first? Bapak, maybe?
No. Here again, it's the problem is the government. The thing is, in Indonesia, and I can only talk about the Indonesian case, Indonesian literature was not taught in schools. It was only this past year that the Indonesian literature has been reintroduced as
Curriculum.
into the curriculum.
Yeah.
So basically, since I first came to Indonesia in 1976, anybody who knows anything about Indonesian literature, it's autodidacta. I mean, they taught themselves. Almost all Indonesian writers, as talented as, I mean, they have taught themselves or learned by pursuing that, reading and writing. But they didn't learn it at school. Most of them did not learn it at school. There aren't writing classes. So, I mean, I think you got to go back to the basics, The educational system is so key in developing authors. If as a little kid you start reading literature, I don't think then the publishers will want to publish it. The publishers want to. There are 200 million kids in Indonesia. They need to read.
Alfian, would you like to add it about this?
I don't know. It sounds like such a big question, right? Like what should book publishers be doing? Wow. I feel that in some ways, maybe this whole anticipation of what the readership wants, I think. Sometimes I think they got some quite fixed ideas about what will work if you're, let's say, a kind of like work of foreign literature, right? So I've seen books, for example, where if you want to sort of like make it big in the West, if you want readers to pick up your books, then your characters, you must have at least one Asian person. Preferably it's an interracial romance between, preferably Asian woman, white man. White woman, Asian man, not so. I think that's, So again, it perpetuates this thing. So on your cover, for example, if it's an East Asian book, then you have like an East Asian woman with like long black hair. Maybe she's got a fan covering her face. If it's something from the Middle East, it's a Middle Eastern woman and she's got like a veil over her face. So you've seen those kinds of images circulating, and unfortunately, a lot of it rides on certain stereotypes, right? Yeah, it sort of like reaffirms what people already think about the East, about the Orient, about the exotic. So, yeah. So I think this idea. I mean, if I do feel sometimes literature does come in conflict with all these kinds of like marketing agendas that publishing houses have, unfortunately, right? So yes.
But publishing houses have to make money. Unfortunately, unfortunately, I mean, they are a capitalistic business. They weren't established for the purpose of, creating peace and love around the world.
So I would say that what Anli said just now was I think provide a little glimmer of hope, which is that you have this sort of like boutique or niche publishing company. So the Polish publishing company that published my work, for example, they're called Typhoony, and that's from the word typhoon, and they really specialize just in Asian titles. So the two publishers there, they speak Japanese, so a lot of their works are Japanese titles, and they do this amazing thing where whichever Asian country they visit, they will run to whichever bookstore, they will grab armfuls of what they think is kind of like the best of the local literature there, and then bring back, read, and then decide to translate. So they're very, very extremely committed to it. And that becomes, as you mentioned, that kind of mission, right? Which is, so as you mentioned, if they have an activist kind of mission, if those kinds of agendas, maybe those are the publishing groups there, which are not so, I'm not saying they're not profit-oriented, but obviously they've got other considerations as well.
Okay.
Hello? Well, I think one of the problem with that is that, I want to reiterate what John said about publishing houses being capitalistic. And like I said, I have worked in a publishing house for years. I know what I talk about. So, for example, if we do put out, and I'm talking about translation titles exclusively, if we want to translate a title that we know to be highly literary and want to be able to sell that well, we will go to first look up if there is any funding for that. And I mentioned the Korean and the Japanese governments. They have very good funding for that. They have a very clear-cut procedure so that we can apply it. And they even have a list of titles that we can be sure that we will have funding for that if we choose to translate those lists. And they have cultural activities, and they have exchange trips and forums you can go to, training sessions you can apply to, and those making a real change in the face of translated literature in Vietnam now. Before that, there were, I think just 8 or 9 years ago, there were just a little bit of translated literature from Japan and Korea, and most was translated via a third language, such as English or French or sometimes. But then they create this kind of romanticism surrounding Korea, and a lot of young people began to study Korean and Japanese in school, and then we have a pool of language learners that also read books, and translators are growing from those kind of pools. And okay, I'm just digressing, but those kind of funding from foreign governments are what fund our literary titles, which are not presumably not sell well on their own, and the very merit of being supported by such a grant help us to promote that titles among readers, because this is something you should read because the government is willing to pay for that. But if we want to translate things from other countries, for example, Indonesia or I don't know, Thai, we don't have that kind of support, and even activist publishers have their limit. Like they can only push so much titles in a year, or they can only hope to sell this or that many amounts for these titles, and the authors won't be paid much, and the translators won't be paid much, and so they can like dwindle when the after a few years that kind of model is not sustainable. And there is also the thing that Pauline Fan has talked about this in the last session, is that depending on such an outsider's funding can be a trap when that kind of funding dried up. For example, we know that a few years now, COVID has made wreak havoc on the status of funding, literary funding around the world, and we also saw that the impact of that on the kind of titles that we put out. So for a few years now, my own publishing house have been putting less and less of quality literary titles and more of mass market titles, essays, and what have you. So it is, I don't think that it is a question that we can solve in the near or far future. It is a dynamic that will always exist, and we just have to kind of learn to live with that.
So the translator have to survive with it. And, okay, like we know, like we unsaid before, it's about the culture and behind of the works. Southeast Asian literature is very, very rich in cultural aspect in the literature. So how do you encounter when trying to bridge the cultural and linguistic difference between the original text and the target language from your experience? Maybe from Pak John first.
Well, in my experience, I mean, you're not going to get a translation that accurately reflects a particular culture unless that the translator is pretty much acculturated. I mean, into the host of the host language, the host culture, and I mean, I look at my own work, as I mentioned when I was in university in the 1970s at the University of Indonesia. I began to translate Sapardi Djoko Damono's poetry. Well, 20 years later, I decided to bring out a proper anthology, and I looked at my first translations, and I was just, oh my God, is that what I thought? You know, I mean, I just, Sapardi was pretty fluent in English. He thought they were okay then, 20 years before that, but I, as the translator, thought, oh my gosh. I mean, I think it was because I didn't know how to write myself. I mean, I think that the translator has to be a good writer. Has to be a good writer. You know, I mean, you mentioned about these books that feel like academic texts. You know, that's the thing. You know, so translators, I think it takes a long time to become a good translator. I think it usually takes a long time to become a good writer. But the more you do it, the more you learn, and over time, I think you get better. You have to listen. You have to be able to listen to editors and to native speakers, you know, that, hey, John, this doesn't read like English, you know. I mean, you have to be able to accept those criticisms and learn from that. I don't think I answered your question, though.
Yeah, because sometimes in the literature, for example, in Indonesian literatures, what I work literally with Anafis works, there's a lot of local language from Minangkabau, and because it's translated to French by Pa Angri, actually, Angri Chambert-Loire, and he put a lot of footnotes on it, actually. Yeah. So and Alfian, how do you approach this challenge, and as your dual role as writer, also as translator?
My gosh. So I went for like a little workshop just now by the translator Dali Sembiring. And it was really an amazing workshop. I highly recommend it. I think there's a part 2 tomorrow. I don't know whether you need part 1 to go for part 2. But anyway, one of the interesting discussions we had was this thing about translation strategies. Yeah, and there's this theory where it's a bit of a false binary, but bear with me, okay? So on one hand you have this thing called domestication, and on the other hand you have this thing called foreignization. So when you do a domesticated translation, what it means is that you try to erase as much as possible any signs of the foreign in that text. So when I read it, I will feel as if that, let's say it's a work written in Indonesian, I will feel that, oh gosh, this work was written originally in English, for example, right? Because it's so fluent, that translation. Foreignization, on the other hand, is one where, you know, it might end up a bit awkward, whatever, but it reminds the reader that, oh, you're reading a translated work. You know, that English isn't this sort of like magic language that's able to assimilate all other languages. You know, that there are things that are going to be quite difficult to translate to English, and then you might sort of like retain some of these words from the original, and then you just have to deal with it, right? So I think, let's say, when you have certain use of honorifics, for example, like pa or mba or bu or something like that, right? Yeah. Do you translate it to sir or ma'am, or, you know, because that would domesticate it, but then that's not really the exact kind of term, right? Yeah. Because these honorifics are not just about formalities, they're about hierarchies, they're about kin relationships as well. So then do you then retain it from the original language? So I think translators, we don't opt for one or the other. There's always kind of like a mixture of these strategies. It's really case-by-case basis, yeah. But I myself, there's always a part of me which feels that as much as I'm writing or translating into English, there's a part of me that also wants to resist this idea that English should be this hegemonic language that is able to absorb all the world's. It's not a Thanos, right? I don't want it to sort of like absorb all languages and somehow feel that, oh, it is able to represent all languages equally. I don't think so. I think that there are certain lacks, there are certain gaps in English that I think your translation should somehow recognize or gesture towards or acknowledge. Yeah.
And Anli, how do you ensure the uniqueness of Vietnam culture into other language?
It is kind of funny because the three books that I have translated into English are in and of themselves not what you will call a typical Vietnamese novel or literary work. So I have I think not very rare, but also not that common experience of having to explain to every one of my editors that if the passages or the whole book read not very smooth in English, it is because the author was trying to make linguistic and stylistic games in their own original story. And I think trying to make them smoother in the target language is also a valid strategy. For example, the first book I translated, Chinatown, was translated into French by the author's own sister, who is a professor of French literature, and she did a thorough and wonderful job of domestication. But for me, I choose to adopt the not foreignizations per se, because I try to make every sentence and passage as English as I can. But the book itself is like full of short sentences with a lot of repetitions, which is frankly a headache to read. But if you get into that, it has this powerful energy and this kind of loopy feeling that you will have an experience that is not like the experience of reading any other works. And that is what I try to preserve in my translation. And I had to spend a lot of time convincing my editor to let me do that radical thing. And she asked me to write a translator's note to explain to potential readers that this is what I choose to do and this is what the author chose to do. And I wrote that, and then when the book was out, I got online and read a lot of readers' reviews. As I noted, don't do that. You read your translators and writers out there, because it's not good for your mental health. And there were a lot of people who say that the styles throw them for a loop because it was so hard to get into. But then some others say that when they read the translator's note, they got a little bit understanding why that translator did that like that, and it's just not out of incompetence or something, but it's like a conscious choice. Not that they like it, but at least they understand how and why we do that. So it is also something that we have to keep in mind. And I'm just also from a translator's workshop. We see BCLT, the British Literature Center for Literary Translation, and all translators have to face this dilemma of keeping the jarring notes in the original or trying to smooth it out for the potential readers. And sometimes it also depends on who is going to read that book and what kind of audience this or that publishing house are used to sell to, and how much can they be convinced to to try to say something that is not like what they are used to, because at any rate, in the end of the day, this is a work of translation, and this is a foreign culture that hopefully can be can give something new way, some new way to look at the world.
I'd just like to add, I think there is a fine balance between that foreignization and domesticization, but at the same time, I think publishers, and there are publishers in this room, we often underestimate the intelligence of our readers. You know, the thing is, I read an English language novel, I'm going to find words I don't know, and I'm going to look them up in a dictionary or go to Google them or something. You know, with the amount of access we have to information today, you know, even if you forget to italicize an Indonesian word or put it in a footnote, you can put it into Google Translate or something if you really, you know, can't understand it.
I would like to add that sometimes it's not like underestimate your the intelligence of your readers, but a matter of priority. For example, if you want to sell this very unique book to 1,000 readers, or you want to try to sell thoroughly Englishized book to like 100,000, that's a question that is very difficult question for publishers to make.
Okay, Anli, it's very interesting since you work also in the publisher right now. So I would like to ask that how you have to select the works that you translate. So what factors actually that influence your decision when you're choosing which works it's going to be translated?
Well, I got asked this question very frequently, and I must say that it is a matter of someone give me the contract. If you are a beginner in your journey, and even if you are an experienced translator, like I consider myself a fairly experienced translator translating into Vietnamese, but my name is not that big that it can sell books, so I don't have that privilege to choose and to dictate what title I can get yet. Though I can answer the question either way, that which title I won't refuse the offer. You want?
Okay. How about you, Alfian?
So I think a lot of translations I've got are mostly commissions as well. Yeah, but I think, I mean, if I feel very strongly against the work, I don't think I would, I would do it, right? So I think the bare minimum is, for me at least, like ideologically or politically, I need to feel that I'm aligned with the writer. Yeah. So if for example the writer is, so I feel like I'm a bit more left-wing liberal, but if the writer writes stuff which I think, oh, this is a bit racist or homophobic or whatever, I don't think I want to touch that. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, your question again was sorry.
What?
How do you choose?
Actually, it's not in the yeah. How do you choose the literature
Right.
to be?
So actually, I had a question for these two
translated?
translators based on your question, which is that okay. So Borges has got this quote, right? It's a very famous quote where he says, "The translation is more faithful than the original." Yeah. I wonder as translators whether sometimes as you translate, you felt a need to so-called edit, and have you ever felt that you have improved on the
story,
original text?
the original story?
Yeah, whether through your translation, which might also involve some elements of editing, you feel, oh, actually I'm expressing this in a better way than the original author. Yeah.
I think it's a little bit like apples and oranges. I mean, the thing is, I think a translation is a new work. You have to start by recognizing that it's a different creation. It's a different creation. Whether it's better or worse is a very subjective thing. But if you look at kind of the facts of life here, Indonesian, for example, has changed so incredibly, as has Bahasa Melayu and Bahasa Malaysia, over the past century. if you look at works from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, the Indonesian is very, very different. And I have had people say about my translation of Belenggu Shackles by Armin Pane, and oh gosh, I can read that in English. I mean, they had a difficult time in Indonesian, you know. You know, so it's sometimes it's not a question of better or worse, but you know.
But I think it's the context and also what you feel on it. Okay.
Well, I think it's actually a very dangerous question. I'm feeling like anything I say now can be used against me.
Okay.
I do think that I do think that as translators we have a duty to edit out things that like which in itself goes against the integrity of the text, because sometimes authors don't have good editors in the first printing of their own book, and sometimes things that worked in that moment or in that particular political or cultural moment don't translate as well when it gets to another language and another audience. But of course, it is always a question of degree. And for example, I can change references to make it more palatable to an English-speaking audience, or rather, I would like I change to a UK audience, and then my American editor will change it another time to fit the US audience. So that's a lot of degrees. But I won't edit out the things that my editors wants to take out, like racism or perhaps some outdated perspectives, because I think it is also important to understand the work as a product of its time and of and show the development of the author over time and so on. And sorry, what is the whole question again?
Through your translation?
Well, I can't reply to that. My readers can answer that, but I can't.
I just want to say one of the most annoying things for me as a translator is when a book is well reviewed, it's the author who is praised. When the book has a negative review, they question whether the translation is good. You know, the thing is, you have to understand that a good translation reflects the original in all of its qualities, whether they are good or bad. You know, so you can't translate, let's say, in the Indonesian novelist La Rose, you can't translate her, women's novels the same way that you translate Pramudia or somebody else. I mean, they have to reflect the original. But the author always gets blamed. The translator always gets blamed.
Oh, tell me about it.
Okay, all right. So each of you has bring, I think, a very deep understanding of your country literary landscape. And I'd like to explore the potential contribution of the Southeast Asian literature to the development or to the world literature. So, Alfian, what potential does the literature of your country have to contribute to the development of the literature? We're going to imagine that Singaporean literature going to be around the world now.
This sounds like a Miss Universe question, you know.
Yes.
What can your country contribute to the world? Oh gosh. I personally, I'm actually interested in varieties of English as a kind of decolonial kind of work, yeah. So in Singapore, I feel that we've developed a certain form of English which we call Singlish, and it borrows like certain vocabulary and certain syntax, grammar structures from Malay and Mandarin and all that. So I feel that that's one way you kind of globalize English, where you talk about like multiple Englishes, and I think that's possibly one kind of contribution, I feel. But at the same time, also there's the kind of like universalist humanist in me, which thinks that good literature is good literature anywhere. So I'm not sure I can really drill down into what's so specific about Singaporean literature, other than, I suppose, some kind of like formal experiments in decentering English, I suppose, and of which I think Singlish might be one of them. Yeah, but of course that's going to be a very marginal kind of literature. This is very, very niche. But I think in terms of formal experimentation, all that, that's one possibility. Yeah.
And Bapak, Pak John, do you think Indonesian literature have a chance to have a
Well,
potential?
I mean, this isn't a popularity contest. I mean, the thing is, Indonesia is a big country. I mean, just as is Southeast Asia. The thing is, if an author, and I think an Indonesian author, should try to become popular in Indonesia first. I mean, I get this, especially from, new authors. Oh, I want to go international. I want to, I'm going to write in English because that's, international. Well, the first thing a foreign publisher does is look and see how popular that author is in her country. Does she sell well in her country? That will make them be able to calculate how popular she might be abroad. You got to be, tuan rumah, di rumah sendiri,
I see. And Anne, do you want to add that?
But actually, it's kind of difficult because sometimes what the domestic audience is looking for is totally different from what the foreign audience is looking for. Like I said, we have tried to find the golden formula to decide on which author will be popular when selling to the West. But so far, and vice versa. But so far, all our efforts have not really come to fruit yet. And so sometimes if it's me, I will just try to push the authors that I think have literary values and, like I said, insight and stuff, and experimental writing. But I'm not sure if, we can try to put our best out there, but at the end of the day, why this or that author got big is sometimes it's a matter of strategy, sometimes it's a matter of luck, and sometimes it's a matter of timing. There's a lot of factors in play that we can't really decide on. What I want to see more from Vietnam is the body of works that during the war, that was written during the war, because there was a lot of good writing, which is my first standard in judging and selling a title, and which has the colonial themes and anti-colonial themes, because we have a war, and some of the books can be comparable to what they are writing about, like Palestinian history or the current Ukrainian war, but because of the geopolitical reasons, they are not translated, and there is just simply no incentives for them to translate or read that kind of book. And anti-war is big, but some not really pro-war, but perspectives from the other side are not well received in the US or elsewhere, and generally there are a lot of historical works that I think would be good to read, even if just something from the perspective of a small country trying to make its way in the world.
Okay, thank you, Anne. And okay, this is not going to be a Miss Universe questions actually. Okay, now it's for Alfian and Anne actually. Since I'm working for the government, for the ministry, I would like to have a not information actually, just want to know what the how is your government in promoting and the internationalists to make the literature to be in abroad, to going abroad, and are there specific initiative or policies that have been particularly effective in helping the local literature to reach the global audience?
Just very briefly, right? Yeah, very, very briefly, there's a National Arts Council, and they do have translation grants. And I think the government is interested in promoting the image of Singapore abroad, because it's about international branding and all that, yeah. That said, though, because it's about international branding, I do feel that they might be cautious about certain works. So this is always the thing about getting government money, right? It's always comes with strings attached. Yeah. So there's the whole cultural diplomacy, international branding thing, but then I think they'll be quite selective about what kind of image they want to project abroad. So I do feel that certain works that talks about Singapore being a bit more authoritarian, or the fact that during the Cold War, it was very repressive towards, say, you know, the left and the communists and all that. Yeah. So like, for example, like Jeremy Tiang, who's a Singaporean translator who's based in New York, he recently translated a work about a Chinese Singaporean man who became a communist. Yeah. And that's, his name's Hai Fan, I think. Yeah. Do you remember the title of the work? They were same publisher, by the way, yeah. So I can't remember, but Hai Fan is this like ex-communist guerrilla or whatever. So I do not think he would have received a grant from the Singapore government, either a publishing grant, a creation grant, or even a translation grant to do this work. Yeah. So you know, it's a mixed picture. On one hand, yes, there's government support, but it's conditional.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty much the same with Vietnam. The types of authors that the government want to promote, and the kinds of authors that we want to translate and will be received well in the US are a very small overlap in the Venn diagram. And I think a few years ago they also set up a translation association department within the Writers Association, but it has just been lying there idly. And I guess right now, I think the Vietnamese government has more in its mind than promoting the image of Vietnam out abroad. So.
And for John, maybe it's like for me, it's a questions. It's very norm questions like. What step do you think that the Indonesian government should take to advance the literature, Indonesian literature, to supporting the translation efforts in Indonesia, actually?
Well, as I did mention earlier, I think the education system is key for promoting literacy and literature within a country. But that said, I mean, there are so many other steps. The thing is, we're talking about a whole ecosystem, not just, you know, literature doesn't stand alone. The first time I went to the Frankfurt Book Fair, which you know is the largest book fair in the world, was in 1990-something. South Korea was guest of honor country at that time. And there's a 4,000 square meter pavilion in which to exhibit your culture. There were almost no books. There were almost no books in English. There were printing presses. There were machines. But they instituted a translation funding program that year. Now look at, 30 years later, now look at where Korea is. Indonesia in 2015 was guest of honor country at the Frankfurt Book Fair, but 5 years later, the government cut the translation funding program. between 2015 and 2019, we sold more than 1,500 titles abroad in translation because of the funding program. Publishers need that money. I mean, that is, it all comes back to money, darling. You know, it's just, that's it. But and then, I mean, Indonesia. They were mentioning about film earlier. Well, I know that the Minister of Education and Culture, as did the Dirjen of Education and Culture, went to Cannes Film Festival and was so proud of the Indonesian film that won an award. Well, what are most films based on? They're based on books. If you don't help the book industry, you don't help the film industry, you don't help the illustrators, you don't help, they all tie together. You can't just, we're going to deal with one, you got to do them all.
Thank you. Okay. Well, everyone, we cover a lot of ground, from the complexities of translation to the role of literature in shaping cultural perception, and also how to bring our region's literature works to the global stage. Now I'd like to open the floor to your questions. I'm sure many of you have thoughts and you'd like to explore further, okay? We have time for up to how many? How many percent? Three? Okay. First, it's for three questions. So if you have one, please raise your hand and state your name, maybe where you come from, and of course, let us know which speaker you'd like to address. From the middle section, okay.
Hello, my name is Samuel. First of all, I would like to thank you for the presentation. My first question would be, how do you think in this digital age the effect of artificial intelligence in terms for translators? Would it be a threat, or it would be a very helpful tool in the future of translation? And my second would be to each of you, what is your proudest moment in your history as a translators or in translation? Thank you.
Let me start. The thing is, I think artificial intelligence, I think it can be very dangerous, but at the same time, it has helped, a lot of people around the world in understanding. The thing is, if you're talking about literary translation, however, it really has a long way to go. We might get there, someday, but not yet. You guys might have your own views. I think my personal, I translated Pramudia Anantaturu's notes from Pulau Buru, and then after the fall of the New Order, I arranged for a tour of his around the United States. And I took him to my family's home. I have a large family, nine siblings, and all my aunts and uncles. My father had just died. But we did a reading from my translation, and Pramudia started to cry. He said he had never heard his words since he wrote them, but he thought they were his words, and he cried. And that was a really special moment.
Anne, would you like to add?
I would say that the question of AI in translation have been popping up in translation circles since last year when ChatGPT first made its splash around the world. And back then, I say that I felt no threat yet, because back then it was very simple, and the result was not so good. Now I'm not that confident anymore because the kind of output that the various models of AI are putting out now are really good, and they can be trained to be better. And especially if you are an old-fashioned translator like me, who won't use AI in any of its iteration yet, and someone who do know how to use it as a tool that can effectively help them to speed up their work and their output, then I will be at a disadvantage compared to that translator. However, I think that there are the highest heights of translation, as well as any kind of other, as well as other kinds of arts and crafts, which not only ask you to do a perfect job, but also your job, something that asks for you to put your creativity and your whole personality and your whole life experience in your product. Then I think there will be pockets of jobs that won't be threatened by AI yet, if the consumers demand that kind of quality in what they consume. So actually, it is you readers who decide if we conscientious translators still have job or not, or will you be content to pay less for something that is perhaps not like 100%, well, I'm not saying I'm 100%, but perhaps 99% or something. Or will you be okay with something that is fast and cheap and can be consumed in an evening and then just throw out in order to jump to the next Netflix sensation or something? So it depends on the consumers and the publishers, like I talked about the 1,000 good readers versus the 100,000 content readers. So in the end of the day, it is you and the whole readership and culture of reading which decided that. And well, my proudest moment, I don't think I have one, but I have a lot of shameful moments. So I will just
Yeah, okay. Alfian, maybe what your proudest moment?
Yeah, I
Etc.
think they've really covered the machine translation versus literary translation really well. I think so maybe like a proudest is in terms of like my own discovery when I'm doing translating. I feel that I went down to etymology, which is like the origin of words, right? So and then realizing that in Malay, we inherit vocabulary from Sanskrit as well as Arabic, as well as those Austronesian words, right? So you have matahari, which is Austronesian, and then you have Surya, you have bulan, and then you have purnama, and you know there are different nuances, and also somehow discovering that in English you also have this kind of like legacies. So in English you have the Anglo-Saxon words, the Germanic words, and then you have the Latinate words, for example. Yeah, and I felt very proud of myself discovering that, oh, the next time I'm translating a pantun, so like Germanic words like baby, and then the Latinate ones like infant, you know, so there's a difference there, right? There's a bit more convoluted if it's like Latinate, and then hound, and then canine, know, and then recognize, right? So I felt this moment of pride when I decided, oh my gosh, I will never use Latinate words in translating pantun ever again. That's kind of like the rule that came for myself. And then because so much of pantun is like, you know, the vocabulary is about natural world. So a lot of Austronesian words. So I'm like, no, I will only translate it to Germanic words. And I remember once I saw a translation of a pantun, and I think the line was like, kita meramaikan kampung, something like that. And it was translated into, we will add new members to society. I'm like, and society is such a Latinate word. You don't know, pantun should not sound like that at all. So I think that's kind of like a proud moment for me.
Okay. Another questions, maybe, audience? Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Iman Yowidianto, or Yowit. We have met before, Pak John, at the 2015 International Translation Symposium at the UI Auditorium, where we debated on the Bahasa Indonesia and Malay being serumpun. But that's another question. I respect you for saying that more love, more care should be given to the translators, not just the authors. And as a sign of my respect, I have to air my grievances too, especially to you, because in this very complex of building, in this complex of buildings, we know one name, Habe Yasin, Paus Sastra. He's the Pope of the literature in English. Do you see yourself as a kind of a Pope of translation since you're the boss of Lontar? I mean, of course, your contributions, your experience, of course, nobody could deny that. But who gets to decide? I mean, it's a very sad thing when in the journal of In Other Words, it was issue 52, when you said that people don't particularly look for Indonesian authors. They look for Indonesia, just like what you said before. It's the tokenism of Indonesia. And I think it's a very sad thing when who gets to decide what should be published or not. We should be empower the authors as independent entities who can actually, they have their voices, not have to be confined to any kind of limited nationalism and all that. But I think before I ramble too much, I would like to know what's your opinion, and maybe if Nguyen and Alfian would like to chip in too, I would be grateful. Thank you for the enlightening talks. It was very fun and enlightening. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well,
for the
thank
questions.
you. Thank you very much for your disturbing question. The thing is, if anybody wants to call me the Paus, I'm sorry. I'm the worst Catholic there is in the world. But you know, whenever an author comes to me, I say, listen, try to get another publisher first. Try to get a commercial publisher. Lontar should be your last, your last hope. Thing is, as I said, we publish poetry. Nobody publishes poetry in the United States. We publish essays, publish dramas, that kind of thing, because nobody else will do it. We don't have a bestseller. We publish Selassie and Gerson Poik and Ahmad Dohari, and these people, everybody's forgotten. I am so happy that people like Eka Kurniawan and Laxmi Pamunchak and Leila Hudori and others are now getting international respect. That means that we don't have to do it, that we don't have to publish the books. It saves us a lot of money, and that's the fact. That we couldn't. Lontar's been in existence 37 years, and it's been a struggle, a complete struggle, to bring out every publication. The translation costs more than a regular text. And we don't have the readership. We don't have the market. We don't, there's so many things. So, I'm certainly not the gatekeeper. I am certainly not Penjaga Gawang here. I mean, I have opened the doors to more Indonesian authors than I think anybody. So, but again, if someone comes to Lontar and says, "Oh, publish my book," I said, "Well, I love the book, but try to get Penguin, try to get Random House, try to get an international publisher before you come to us."
Thank you, Pak John. And I think the time is almost up, and because in the screen I see it's only 5 minutes left, I'm going to close the question and answer session. So, ladies and gentlemen, we finally come to the end of our session. I would like to say thank you very much to our three incredible speakers, and to all of you who participating in this session, thank you very much. There's a cue card for closing moderator. Okay. On behalf of Jakarta Content Week, we would like to thank to all speakers and also the participants for attending this session. And we still have a lot of interesting session on Jak10. For more information on Jak10, follow us on Instagram at Jak10. And see you. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.